September Mytech U edition. This is a monthly educational series for technology and business topics. My name is Stephanie Kingsley, and I will be your moderator today. This month, we're going to be discussing the 7-layer security dip. And we're fortunate to have James Motz and Andy Brogan from Mytech here who will lead us through today's topic. So before we turn the presentation over to them, just a couple of notes for everyone. Thank you first for joining us today. This presentation is being recorded and it will be available 24 hours after the presentation. The audience is on mute. However, if you do have a question, please use the question section of the GoToWebinar control panel and we'll do our best to interject your question into the conversation or we'll follow up with you afterwards. So with that said, James, please go ahead and introduce yourself and go ahead and start the presentation.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is James. I am the NOC manager here at Mytech, and that sort of involves doing a lot of security pieces. So topics that we're going to go over today, a lot of those are systems that my team works with on a daily basis. I'm joined today by Andy Brogan. So Andy, what do you do here at Mytech?
Hey everyone, I'm Andy. I am the solutions architect here at Mytech. Been in the industry for about 20 plus years and worked in security and sales, system design, etc. So I have a few areas of expertise, and we're going to be sharing some good security information for you today.
So today we're talking about security, and we're approaching it from this concept of layers, specifically of like 7-layer security dip. Taco dip is a, kind of a popular thing around, I'd say Minnesota in general. So why are we approaching it this way? We'll kind of get into that a little bit, what the layers are. And as we go about this, we're also going to, kind of offer a few suggestions on a potentially delicious taco dip as well for you to have it, a little side bonus to paying attention today. We're also going to then loop this in. It's one thing to just name out these services and layers and what they mean, but we actually want to break it down for you, the listener, whether you're an executive in your organization or who has some responsibility with IT, or you're actually the person in IT who's executing on this. Well, how do these play out in your organization's daily life? And then there's some bonus content here at the end. There's sort of 7 core principles, but there's ways to enhance that, and we'll get into those as well. And when is an appropriate time to go looking for those? So the start of this is like, really security, but like, why don't we have to talk about security? Everybody basically comes out and says they have security, right? So why are we making a big deal out of this? Why are we bringing this up to you? We already have security. Well, we wanted to bring this up because everyone's got it, but it doesn't always work, or they're not paying attention, or they've got some sort of configuration issue that's making some problems. Recently, we went through this with these two they get media big names. That's how you know it's serious when the media picks up on them. There was this WannaCry exploit and this Petya exploit. They made the news about 2 to 3 months ago. They were ransomware or infection attacks, and they got pretty bad. When they start making The Guardian or other like Time Magazine or New York Times, other sort of major media outlets to start reporting on how bad this was. WannaCry in particular was so disruptive that it, I think we're going to get to it here in a second. It basically shut down some hospitals. They couldn't operate on patients because of this. It's not that the hospitals didn't have good security or that they were negligent necessarily. There were layers of their security they hadn't really picked up on. Another impact of this was in the radiation monitoring in Chernobyl. So, the whole part about whether or not a nuclear reactor is being monitored successfully has a lot of potential worldwide impact, and it was taken out by these attacks. So this is a topic that gets a lot of discussion, and it's very confusing actually to consider IT security in a nutshell. I don't know, Andy, how do you usually approach it when customers, like when they start asking security and they just start there? Like, how do we even break that out?
Well, the first thing I usually tell customers is, unfortunately, the bad news is you're never going to be 100% secure because, unless you are going to unplug and not have anybody work in your office. So it's pretty unrealistic. There's so many different layers to security that, if you don't address them all the time, you're never going to be totally protected. So the next best option is to kind of layer in, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is to figure out, how can I protect myself in different ways so that when I'm going on the internet and doing my day-to-day business, that I'm not going to be really easy to hack or extremely exposed. So that's where you come in with these different layers and say, hey, we need protection here, here, and here, and then we need to do these things here. So that gets you closer to that 100%. Is kind of where you want to go. So,
right. Yeah, it's hard work to keep everything totally 100% ahead of the bad guys, and the more layers you got, the better you are.
Yep.
One of the things that we want to bring up in particular is we're not trying to brag too much, maybe a little bit. We'll brag. These global impacting threats that kind of ran rampant through the internet at large. And Mytech and our customers that we work with, and we're not the only MSPs who are in this position, but we can speak to how we protected it. We didn't really feel these impacts. And there were some very specific reasons why. And that kind of gets into some of the layers that we're going to go into. Like we had more than one layer here. We were approaching each one and making sure that each layer, to the best of our ability, was at its peak performance and operational health, so that even if one of them wasn't catching up to the bad guys, another one was. And then it also meant we were paying attention. It seems kind of like a silly thing to say, but a lot of these places that got hit with this stuff, they had all the tools, they had the layers, but they didn't necessarily have the resources to watch them as closely as they needed to. And so as we go through this, we'll kind of show you some of the tools that we used and the ways that we were watching them to limit our impact from these kind of global threats. So here we got the security dip recipe. Yes, that's that one. All right, first layer, security spam. So anti-spam is the first way to protect yourself from getting in there. We have what we call an MX defense. It's our kind of rebranding. We choose a vendor that is appropriate, that sits in between your company and the members at large, that people sending emails in. This is really important because the fastest way to put bad things into a network is to kind of package them up in an email and send them to somebody on the inside to say, hey, open this. And a lot of times they do. And even if they're somewhat, aware of this, it's very easy when you're, how many emails do you open in a day? I find myself hovering that finger over that mouse button to double click on things I shouldn't sometime. And this is where I live every day, right? So it's important it's one of the primary vectors in the security world, what they'll call the ways in. One of the ways that the bad stuff gets started is to just send it through email. So when you have a competent security layer there to filter all the email, not only to keep the just spam out, which is what everyone thinks about first, a good anti-spam solution, like the ones that we've selected, will also layer in some antivirus layer of detection, attachment scanning, URL redirection. There's a bunch of layers here that they will kind of be your first defense on the incoming threat. And in the two cases that we were talking about here, these two major threats that were released, we had protection from those specific threats from hour 0+. It depends on the solution and the way that it was delivered, because both of those tools were sort of an advanced delivery mechanism. So it's kind of rough guessing in some ways, but most of our tools were reporting interception of the threat from hour 0 or up. So that's pretty good. That means basically before the exploits even gotten started globally, this layer took care of it for our customers. Now, the corresponding layer, of course, and then, oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, James, one thing too that spam can help protect against is sometimes hackers today, we're seeing more and more customized attacks that are trying to change URLs and send spam from internal mail messages. So sometimes what spam can do too is help protect against some of those custom attacks too, which is a great feature. I think everybody pretty much has spam today. If they don't, they're probably getting inundated with tons of email. So, but setting it up properly is important. So,
yeah, and I mean a lot of places they'll kind of even lump it in there. You'll go to a hosted email solution. It comes with spam filtering, but you find out you can't really configure it, and it may not have as fast as a threat response as some of the more advanced solutions that we're offering. So, you know, Office 365 comes to mind. They've got anti-spam within it. I'm sure it works. I don't think they caught this stuff at hour 0. I think it was a little bit out. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but that's one of the examples. So, and as we were building this out, we were looking at, you know, well, what's the sort of the base layer? The first thing that you want to make sure you get a good taco dip is, of course, refried beans, because what would be a good taco dip without that? And of course, if everyone wants this recipe, here it is. It's from All Recipes down there, but good. All right, the next layer, and this is where I'm going to kind of turn over to Andy because he deals a lot with this, is the on the edge, the firewall.
So the firewall layer, most businesses have a firewall of some type, but there's different types of firewalls. That's the most important thing to understand. The business class firewalls will have extra services that protect you even further on the internet. The real basic firewalls won't. They just have basic, I'm not going to let somebody connect coming inside. But what happens is when you're on the internet, you're actually going out and connecting with the remote website, and you're starting a connection with that site. So whatever happens back and forth between that site is really just already, traffic's going to flow. And so that hacker could actually intercept that traffic and start injecting things that may be, maybe dangerous for your network. So that's where the business class firewalls, they actually do what we call unified threat management. And what that does is it actually goes deep into the packet and it inspects the actual traffic going to and from that website to see if there's any malicious type coding inside of that traffic. You can also do extra things where you can block users from being able to download certain types of files. So for instance, if you don't want any of your users to install screensavers or executables or things that are known to have potential antivirus or things like that in them, you can actually block those completely. The other feature of unified threat management is antivirus at the gateway as well. So that allows us to have a subscription, and you usually pay yearly for this, but they keep 0-day whenever they find out, they update your firewall, and that way if there's a website that's been compromised or something, you can either block that website, automatically they block it, or if there's a new virus that came out, they will scan that. So we're not only, again, this is a layered approach. If you think about it, we're not only depending on antivirus on the PC, which yes, we still totally would recommend, but we also have it at the gateway to kind of inspect traffic that's going back and forth, just in case those hackers have found a way around the latest antivirus software or things like that. And we've seen that happen where they've actually crafted malware or viruses to try to circumvent the local antivirus. So this again gives us another layer at the gateway. So this one is super critical. If you have a low-end non-business class firewall, or if you don't know if you have an ongoing subscription with your firewall, it's really important to talk to your IT provider and find out, why am I not getting this yearly charge? Because you should be paying that and making sure that's correctly set up, because that's probably one of the most important things to protect your network.
And Andy, it's worth clarifying, if you don't pay anything annually, do you have any protection at all?
Probably not, because usually almost all of these with any firewall I've ever dealt with is subscription based. So you usually have a yearly fee for maintaining the warranty and this, they call it unified threat management. There's different names for it, but they'll have some type of fee yearly you're paying for that service, because it is an advanced service and it's not usually very expensive, but you're probably not protected.
Yeah,
Is this another one of those layers too, where you don't want to just set it and forget it, right? You want to constantly be doing the updates. It's not something you can just set up and leave running. You have to constantly kind of be monitoring it.
Well, usually it automatically updates.
It does, okay.
I usually recommend most customers, if you haven't had a review of your firewall in a long time, like it's been a year or so, might not be a bad idea just to go in there and have an expert check out the settings, make sure things are set up correctly and you're protected properly. Again, security takes maintenance. So
yeah. What's more likely to happen is that somewhere along the way you could have set in something that bypasses your subscription security, and then you've forgotten later on, and now you've got kind of a hole through the protection. So you want to keep making sure that you're constantly reviewing it. You're never leaving it sit for years and years and just hoping that it's working for you.
Exactly.
And one thing to point out on this is that the systems we use, we're catching the threats. Again, it varies depending on which form of those threats are coming through. From hour 0 up to hour 15, that was when our tools were like putting up the roadblocks to prevent it from going ahead. And let's see the next. Oh, going here. There we go. The next thing, then this corresponds, of course, in our taco dip recipe to the creamy taco seasoning layer, which is good to kind of get that southwestern flavor going for you.
You're making me so hungry, I can't stand it.
I know, this is I mean, we gotta find some chips here. So I want to move on to the next layer, which is kind of near and dear to my heart. This is Microsoft patching. This is one of those boogeymen of the IT industry in which everybody's got to do it. It's a necessary evil. Nobody likes doing it. It's always on that important but not urgent kind of layer, and it's kind of hard to do it well, and it has a strong potential to annoy people. Why did you just reboot my computer? I have my Word document open and blah, blah, blah. So again, not trying to brag too much, but a little bit. Mytech has worked very diligently on patch compliance for Microsoft updates. This applies to both the operating system and the Microsoft applications, from anything from Office to SQL. They are core to many businesses being successfully operated. The key part here was that both of these exploited vulnerabilities had patches out over 30 days before the exploit went rampant through the internet. That means most places had been sitting on these updates, and if they'd applied them, they probably would have been okay. Now, this isn't a universal truth. There are, as usual in security, it's a little bit fuzzy in the details. There were ways that a patch machine could get affected. And of course, if your machine was incapable of receiving an update, you would not have been in that group either, i.e. XP or 2003 or something like that. But if you had done your job and patched, you were basically already safe from the most part at hour 0 as it was coming out. It's worth noting, actually this threat got so bad for both of these that Microsoft actually went back on its original promise to actually release updates for XP and for 2003, despite claims years ago that they never would ever again. But things had gotten so bad that they actually made a patch public, which then all the admins then had to go apply because that was the first time to come out. So this is a complicated process. I've done at least 1 or 2, I think, Mytech used in the past about it and what it takes to do well. And we're, of course, happy to discuss this with anybody about how we approach it, our methodology. We're currently sitting at 96% or better of our global population being up to date within roughly 7 to 10 business days from Microsoft releasing an update. So pretty strong case to stay up ahead of it. And of course, what would be taco dip without guacamole? What would be IT without patching? These things just go hand in hand together. And I don't know, Andy, it's sort of been more my world than yours, but I don't know if you had any notes on patching and what a pain it is.
Yeah, it can be a challenge, and I think this is why managed service providers, in the last 10 years have become. Actually, I think this is I wouldn't call it secret sauce, but I would say this is why IT businesses that look at IT want to outsource these services, because they're difficult to do. And to patch this and keep it consistent and do reports. There's some internal tools you can use from Microsoft to do that, but again, it's very difficult to hold compliance to that. And just one machine, if it's not patched, if it goes to the wrong site, could be vulnerable and could bring something into your network that could spread to other stuff or give the hacker, a footprint, and then they can work from there on something else. So yeah, super important. Got to have it.
Kind of hard to do, and it's easy to just assume that it's working, where it's actually, I mean, it's decently robust, but as you scale up, the number of chances for it to break on a given machine just increase exponentially. So it is something we advise, paying close attention to, whether through a managed service provider or through, being very, very diligent in your IT team. But yeah, most IT people we speak with, this is their first thing that they ask for is, you guys do our patching. So another one here, which, yeah, go for it.
So the fourth layer, that is antivirus and anti-malware. This is pretty, pretty commonplace to have this. Most people know nowadays, if you're running a Windows, operating system, that you're going to want to have some type of antivirus. I would even go as far as recommending that for a Macintosh nowadays, because there's more and more exploits that are trying to seek that system out for compromise. So, but Mytech, we're using WebRoot, and James is kind of our expert on it. He can probably talk to that. But basically, it allows us to manage all of your machines and servers into one pane of glass. So that allows us to see what's going on with the whole network, not only just one machine at a time. That's why you want a business class type antivirus that allows for that, because then you can react quickly. There also, there's many different types of virus software out there. I've used probably 10 different ones over the last 20 years. They all have pros and cons at different points in their development stage. They're all pretty, I would say, James, would you agree? I mean, they all do a fairly good job, the top 5. I mean, there's not a huge difference between them. It's more or less, management and trying to make it easy for IT staff to remediate problems quickly.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. And some of them do better at this thing than that thing, but they're all, the most important thing for all of them is that they're working. And again, it feels like a thing that should just work. For the most part, it just works, but it does occasionally not work, and then you're in trouble. And that's where it's difficult often for it. Again, it's one of those things that your IT team generally has 10, 100 things on a given day, and making sure antivirus is operating everywhere needs to be a priority, but is one of many priorities, and is one that's often kind of overlooked. We liked WebRoot. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I would say we liked WebRoot from a partnership perspective. They're very responsive to working with our customers' needs. They're pretty flexible and lightweight product. It doesn't mean other products aren't equally good or safe. WebRoot in particular, from hour one, had the threat detection, and its agents were picking it off. One thing we did like about WebRoot is it's not reliant on a definition download. It was able to, a lot of times you have to go download the update that includes watch out for this thing. WebRoot actually uses a threat cloud intelligence and automatically updates. And so within 1 hour, its machines were blocking this threat. So that's pretty good. We're happy with that kind of response. And of course, like antivirus is diced tomatoes. I don't really know why it's like that, but I do know that I can't think of a taco dip without diced tomatoes, and I would also not ever assume that there is a managed machine that we deal with that doesn't have AV without some really good reason. So that's how I associate those in my brain. The fifth layer, this is sort of a new one. We've been bringing out kind of a new layer of technology that protects our customers, and that's putting security on DNS lookup. So what this is a service that an end user basically routes their DNS request through this service, which can then evaluate if it's a healthy or not healthy request. It's different than the firewall level. This goes beyond that to an external service that is powered by Cisco. They purchased a very credible and widely respected service and have improved it. And it does a very, very good job of not only does a little bit of content filtering, like, you shouldn't go to this bad site, but it also like is able to pick out a lot of modern threats will actually use algorithmically generated lookups. Complicated terminology. What does that mean? It means that when the bad guy gets a piece of software on a device, that little bad software's got a phone home. The phoning home can be picked off by this umbrella service, where many other services cannot filter that out of the general day-to-day business traffic. So we call that kind of command and control traffic. That's where your bad software is trying to get instructions from the bad guy central. And this particular service was very effective in stopping those two threats we call out, but also the original wave of the crypto locker, crypto wall, that kind of scourge of the IT world that was going around a couple of years ago. This was one of the only truly effective ways to intercept that, because if you can prevent the bad software that got installed from reaching its home command server, it actually is pretty neutered. It can't do the bad things it's meant to do, like encrypting all your files and holding you for ransom, if it can't get instructions from its home. So by us layering this in to our customers, we were able to provide another layer, a very effective layer, preventing, even if you did get infected, preventing the threat from getting worse. And that was highly effective with it from about hour one. I don't know, Andy, did I do a good job explaining that? This is sort of a new one for us.
Yeah, I've used this service in the past too. It kind of overlaps a lot with the firewall, because sometimes with the firewall UTM service, you can also do some DNS, or it's basically web traffic and filtering out bad sites, that type of thing. But what I think the advantage is here, it's another service that may overlap with that firewall, but it's also a whole different database that they're looking at in addition, from a different company. And that's why we kind of like it, because it's not that expensive to do and allows us just another fail safe, right? Another really tight layer that will prevent, just in case one of them doesn't catch it, the other one hopefully will. And that's kind of how I think it's best used. So,
yeah, absolutely. We've been very happy with the success rate. Just like in general, I'm very happy with green onions. If you're not a fan of green onions on your taco dip, I'm not sure that we have much more to discuss.
I can talk about the sixth layer.
Yeah.
So Active Directory, if you don't know what that is, it's something that's built into Microsoft Windows Server product. Basically, it's a database that manages user accounts and machine accounts. And what that allows us to do is, first off, it makes administrating many computers much more easier than having to run around and touch settings on each of them individually. So there's a huge advantage to that. The other larger advantage around security is that you can actually set up what they call policies that will be company-wide. So let's say I wanted to have everyone's screensaver and computer lock after 5 minutes when they're not using it. I could set that within group policy, and then that would push out to all of my end user machines. So local administrator rights, that's listed up here, is one of those examples. How that would work is we could set up local users to only be users on those computers, which in essence would not allow them to go on a website, download an application that could be malicious or not, and install that application. So that they would have to go to a local administrator or call the IT support help desk, and then get permission or get someone to help them install that. So that way that person could validate whether that's a legit website. So it's just another way to secure your network. We also do password policies through that. There's other things like, how often those passwords expire, when users have to change those. all of that is controlled through Active Directory. So it's a very key, important a component to your security. And yes, cheese is also a very important component to the to the taco dip. So I think it's a great analogy to have Active Directory, because I have had clients that we've brought on that do not have Active Directory installed. So the first thing we do as a managed service provider is we require them to install and incorporate Active Directory so that we can have those controls. In fact, like HIPAA, I just ran into this a few months ago. We had a client that was that was supposed to be in HIPAA compliance. Well, they weren't. They were failing that compliance regulation because they didn't have Active Directory set up. So we had to move them into that. So I think it's kind of a baseline. Most clients have this, but there's some smaller ones that do not. So, but it is an important component to that. So,
yeah, it's huge. And we got the note in here, like if there are enough ways to pivot on this that's not a security in and of itself, but it's definitely a layer to ensure that your users are not necessarily administrators of their own machine. So if they do something wrong, that's one more hurdle for the bad software to leap to be able to execute and do work on the machine. So yeah, that's pretty key. And then, Andy, this is also like, I know a little bit about this, but I know you often work with other customers to set up secured remote access.
So a lot of the what we've seen lately, anything, when you think about security too, you want to think about there's different points of entry, right? There can be employees that are internal that maybe are not trustworthy, or someone could socially engineer with an employee. But the biggest, that's usually not your biggest threat. The biggest threat is usually what you have open to the internet, right? Because the internet, anybody from China to the US could be trying to connect to your servers any time of the day. So when we talk about servers that are exposed, one of those is, well, hey, we need to work remotely. How do we get in securely? How do we open our network to the world of the internet so that I can go to a coffee shop, or I can work from home, or when I'm traveling to a foreign land, I can get in correctly and get access to my files. So it's very important when we design those things that we think about security. There's probably a dozen ways to do remote access correctly. We're just kind of pointing out one of them here. But usually what we do in most cases is we don't, like remote desktop server is a service that allows someone to connect to a server and remote a desktop, right? We usually don't connect that or open that up to the internet by itself. We just don't feel it's secure enough unless it has some other layers in front of it. So one of those layers we use in some instances is a VPN for remote access. So VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, and what it actually does is creates a secure encrypted tunnel from wherever you're at in the world, or in the US, in a coffee shop or at home. You can create an encrypted tunnel for your data to go back and forth into that network. So what that allows is all of that data is protected, including the login that you use to first initiate that. So in essence, what it does is it lets you connect and then get into the network securely, and then it keeps all that traffic secure going back and forth. So another area that we've seen, we had some customers that we saw about 2 months ago. I think they had some remote desktop services open to the internet, and we saw all of a sudden within a week, we saw a huge attack happening on those remote desktop servers. And actually, they didn't hack into the network, but they tried to so hard that those servers just got crushed, and users were not able to use those services because they were exposed. So what we did in response to that on some of the clients that still had those open was we said, hey, let's get this VPN running and protect that, and then the problem went away. So it's an important thing to design it properly. You want to make sure you take security in mind. So if you have a remote system, those are ones you want to look at when you're doing your security review on a regular basis or designing those. Does that kind of make sense to you, James? Would you agree with that?
Yep. Oh yeah, we've seen plenty of people trying to break in on those remote desktops.
Yep.
And quality olives, just like quality VPN, fairly essential here to what you want for your properly layered up security. It's just another way you don't want to open and expose another layer in there.
So I'll talk about the next slide too if you want to move on.
Yep.
So what does this mean for executives? So, one thing to really think about is, no matter if you have IT staff or if you're hiring a managed service provider like Mytech, really the security of your organization and your data, your IPO, that's really the responsibility of leadership. So, you need to actively engage with, your staff and your IT department and your managed service provider to make sure that, the different things that need to be checked on a regular basis and the settings are to a standard that makes you feel comfortable, right? Not every client, like, we were talking about Active Directory and locking down user accounts as administrators. Not every client just chooses to do that, and that's fine. That's the client's decision to take that risk or not. Because there's with security, I look at it like a scale. There's usability on one side, right? User usability, and then there's security on the other side. And many times when you turn one up, the other goes down a little bit. So, clients that I've worked with over the years usually have to make some hard choices sometimes and say, hey, do we want to allow users the freedom to do this because there's a risk to that? But if they need to do that for their business, maybe they have to take that risk. But the best thing to do is be informed, and I think that's the most important thing. So reach out and find that out.
Informed risk, like you said, Andy. You don't want to be uninformed of your risk. You want to know what the risks are.
Yep, and I think the second point there too kind of goes along with that, awareness and I think education, not only of executives, but education of your staff. We've actually, and we'll talk about this later, but we have some new services that we're starting to offer that help with education around this. Because if people don't know, that there's malicious emails coming in trying to get people to click on faxes that don't really exist or something, if one of those slips through, they could easily click on it. So really getting people aware of what's happening out there. And we've seen an extreme, I would say, a massive amount of attempts at some of this stuff in the last year or two. It's just been huge. And the reason it's so big, the reason hackers are doing this and malware is becoming so common, and CryptoLocker is a great example of that. They made millions, $50 million in a 2-year span is what was tracked over Bitcoin. So we're talking huge amounts of money these guys are making. So don't let yourself fall victim to that. So, and then the last point here is, does your organization have these layers in place? So really that's the point of this, is challenging everyone to start thinking about this. And if you don't know the answer to that, to reach out to us or to your IP provider or your IT department and check on that. And there's probably other layers to talk about here too. 7 layers is just kind of the basics, but there are other things too, like application updates. What about your third-party applications? What about Java Flash? What about your main ERP? What about, are you keeping those up to date? Because anything that's exposed to the network, and especially to the internet, could have a vulnerability. So that's the things you want to check and make sure you're keeping those in place and patched.
Yeah. And Andy, like you were saying, it's not just having the layers in place, it's keeping them up to date. Like you were talking about the firewalls, making sure that you have a paid subscription and things like that. So those are kind of some of the key things that you're going to want to ensure, right?
Yep, and I'd say, the number one thing, if there's anything an organization, can do, I think these layers are really important, but the main thing is to keep things updated, because that's, we've seen so many times. In fact, if you look in the news and do research on any one of the hacks that have happened in the last, like Equifax is a great example. I was just reading about that yesterday in more detail. They haven't really told what happened, but there basically was a system that was using Apache web services that they hadn't patched. And what happened was, it was fixed, but they didn't apply that in time, and then someone got in and started stealing millions of people's information because of that. So really that's the exposure, and there are times where maybe the hackers know about this vulnerability before the company that can patch it, and there's nothing anyone can do about that. But more than not, I'd say 70% or 80% of the time, what we've seen is this is a known fix and someone hasn't patched it, and so someone takes advantage of that. So
right, I would agree with that, and that's why the layering is important. The most important thing is to keep updated. When they get ahead of you is when the layers come into play. We also want to bring this back to the actual person doing the work, right? So what does this mean for you, the person who's like got to do all these jobs, right? Well, you need to make sure that you need to be the voice of technical expertise. So generally, the people at the top of the food chain in most organizations, this isn't their world, and it's very difficult to bring cybersecurity, IT risk. It's very difficult to understand that, and so they're going to need to rely on you, the professional, to make good recommendations, appropriate recommendations. You can't run around spreading what is often the secure world called fear, uncertainty, and doubt about everything, and like, oh, the sky is falling. But they're going to expect you to identify the places that should be taking action. And on the flip side, if you're an executive in an organization and maybe you don't have somebody on staff that can provide that to you, I would encourage you to find somebody who can do that, whether that's a consulting engagement like with a company like Mytech, or it's a hiring to that or whatever. You do want to make sure that you have those sources to give you the information that you need, because most executives need to focus on running their business, and you put somebody in place that gives you the right recommendations on security.
Yep. And this is becoming more and more important for any size business. In fact, I would not say that small business is going to be exempt to that. It's and they're the ones that struggle the most at finding these resources. So I think finding a good partner to work with is really important.
Yeah, there aren't enough Andys in the world out there. I'll tell you that. So people have been in the industry this long. Yeah, but it's hard to find people who give you good advice.
Yeah, very true. So we got about 5 minutes left, or 3 minutes, so we're running out of time. Let's jump into our bonus layer, shall we?
Yeah.
So bonus layer number one, like I said earlier, there could be about 23 layers you could actually apply to this if you really wanted to. But bonus layer number one, this is something we recently got into offering as a service to our customers, but it's user awareness training. And the awesome thing about this is we've seen so many social type hacking and other types of things the last few years that we found that we had I think at the last what was the I'm forgetting what the name of it was. We had our presentation called the human firewall, and basically what that was about was talking through how users are a security risk, right? Because they may not know what they don't know, right? So they might click on an email that got through all the layers that are there, and they might click on this and say, oh, it's a fax from somebody I don't know. Maybe let me check it out. They click on it, and all of a sudden something tries to infect. And if it finds a vulnerability that it gets around the other layers, then it could get into your system. So we really feel that user training is really important. And one of the services we offer is to have videos and emails being sent to users on a weekly, monthly basis that give them some training and say, hey, here's the latest thing that we've seen in the industry going on, and it's in a very simple format that just describes, here's how hackers are trying to get your information or get into your network. Be aware. And it's short enough and easy enough for users to digest that they can look at it and go, oh, hey, I didn't know that. So in case something does come in, they're aware of it. So we think that's another critical layer to think about. And of course, cream cheese. No, is that sour cream? Sorry.
Sour cream.
It is cream cheese. Wow.
Oh, that's up in the game a lot.
Layer two, endpoint device security. I'll talk about that too. Laptops, hard drives, important data on them, right? If someone gets your laptop, it's not that difficult to take data off there. In fact, it's simple. So if you have customer data or IPO data on that laptop, you want to make sure that that's encrypted. It's easy to do now with Windows 10, Windows 8, professional or above. Easy to do. Make sure those devices are encrypted, because you just don't know what's going to happen. They could easily get stolen, and then someone could steal your data. Again, this is something that as we've seen over the last 5, 6, 7 years. Laptop gets stolen from an important company, hits the headline news. Oh yeah, they stole all this information, and then it turns out it was some executive's laptop that had a database full of critical information, and some hacker got a hold of it, or it got sold to a hacker, and then it gets exposed. So super important. Want to do that.
And of course, pico de gallo. I mean, why wouldn't you if you're going to chop the tomatoes anyway?
Yes.
So multi-factor authentication. Yeah, yeah. Well, this is an ongoing thing. Where it really comes down to is that passwords are kind of they're becoming a weak point in a lot of security. They're kind of the bare minimum requirement. And what we're trying to get to is that you need to be able to, if you do more than one form of identification of who am I really allowed to do this, that prevents somebody from guessing that you used your dog's name as your password. They might be able to guess that, but then they also have to have the second factor, whether there's token based, there's SMS, there's email. There's a number of ways you can implement this that we're exploring. Please explore this. This is a huge step forward way to elevate your overall security game, to keep yourself safe and secured. And you know, I'm not sure that I would go straight to sriracha. I might do something like, you know, what's the there's a couple of more
Ortega all the way.
Yeah, well, you know, there's some other hot sauces out there, so
I don't know if that's
you
my
don't have to go to
favorite.
there's some other like Cholula, for example.
So bonus layer number 4,
single
sign-on. I'll talk about that. That kind of takes that to the next level too. What single sign-on kind of does is it allows a password database, if you will, so that users don't have to use the same password on everything. Because that's one of the trends we've seen out there is, you know, I'm going to use my dog's name and then I'm using it for this system, this system, this system, and this system. Well, guess what happens? Somebody gets that one password. Well, they get into all this stuff. So what we like to do with this is partner this with two-factor authentication is the best way, where you have a single sign-on, you get into your systems, and then everything else is kind of stored behind the scenes so you can get into those other systems easier. And this also ups the level of usability for the users. So sometimes, you know, there's definitely a cost to it, but sometimes it's a benefit. You know, it takes the security layer and it makes it a little easier for users to digest because it's simpler to get into the other systems. So
I'm much more willing to put in a long and good password if I don't have to put it in once or twice a day instead of 60, 100 times a day, right? So
exactly. And I hate lime flavored chips, but we'll just go with chip because you can't eat taco dip without chip. But lime, no, not my favorite.
Lime is delicious.
So if you're infected with ransomware, we wanted to leave you this too. Like, I mean, what is the outcome if this stuff isn't in place and you get hit with it? Functionally, like a lot of times, especially if you don't understand the technology, you might think, well, there might be something else I can do, right? No, there are two options if you actually get nailed with this advanced ransomware, and that's restore that data from backup or pay the ransom. There really isn't a workaround to like get it back or undo it or anything else like that. The reason these things are so effective, the reason they made so many millions, was because you really are limited in your options. And this is only going to continue. It's so profitable. It's such a useful for a criminal activity that it's only going to get more and more of this as time goes on. And again,
I agree. It's a money maker, so that's why they're going after it. Money drives them. So that's having good backup is really critical.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, James and Andy. That was really, really informative and appreciate it. I don't see any questions coming in over the panel, but again, if anybody has questions, please feel free to post them there or reach out to us at any time. Before we head out, we just kind of wanted to go over, we have a couple events coming up. We have our in-person event on October 24th in Colorado and on October 26th in Minnesota, where we will actually be destroying a server and then recovering it in a live demonstration. So it's going to be a really cool presentation. If you check out our website, mytech.com/events, you'll see where you can register for both of those. As well as
physical destruction. Usually it uses like fire or something. Yeah. So
I think fire, ice. I don't think we've decided which method we're using yet, but we're going to destroy it. So it'll be fun. It's a little interactive. So. And then just a note with that as well, if you're joining us at one of those events, we do have a launch party that's happening immediately after it. It's kind of a secret. You'll be getting details in the next couple of weeks. So plan to stay a little bit after for that launch party. Also on mytech.com at events, you'll see we already have our Mytech U for October up and ready for you to register. Next month, we're going to be talking about tales of innovation and adoption of the speed of cloud. So we're going to be talking about big data and how cloud enables that. So be sure and go register for that as well. So yeah, we hope you enjoyed the presentation. Andy or James, do you have any final remarks?
I just say thanks everybody for attending, and you know, if you have security questions or needs, you know, definitely reach out to us. We're glad to work alongside you guys to help make you safer in our scary world of the internet today. So
security is a hard thing to do, and you gotta please make sure you're paying attention to it, whether that's with a provider like Mytech. I think we do a good job of it, or with somebody else. But I mean, it's difficult, so please make sure you're paying attention.
Awesome. And I think we need to go out for some taco dip now because I'm really craving it.
I agree. I'm starving.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Bye-bye.